Hello and welcome to the Mughals to Mahatma series by Convert IAS. This is the second video in the series where we are going to discuss the Anglo-French rivalry. Now, we all know that the break in British control over India happened in the year 1757. 1757 is considered as a break year because this is the year in which Battle of Plassey took place. In 1764, Battle of Buxar took place, and everybody inconclusively agrees that it is in these two battles that the British gained control over India. Now, what if I say that there is yet another year, 1760, in which a landmark event happened, and that landmark event in fact led to the control of Britain over India? It is that landmark event that we are going to come to at the end of this discussion. So keep watching the discussion until the end to know what it is. Now let's start. To discuss the Anglo-French rivalry, we have to first see the idea called Indian Ocean trade. Now what you see here is the map of the Indian Ocean. You can see Indian Ocean here. This is the Indian Peninsula. What you see here is the sea routes, and what you see here in red is the land routes. This is the infamous Silk Route that starts from China and extends till through Asia to Europe. And in the blue color, you can see the sea routes. So the parties that had sea route trade with India was one, the Arabian Peninsula, second, the Africans, third, people from Indonesia and Java. So India was rich, very rich, rich with spices, products of artisans. So these things were captured by the Arabians through trade and they were sold to Europe at a 10x rate. So Europeans were buying these things through Arab middlemen. Why? Because they don't have direct access to India. They have to either come through this land route because this region was ruled by the Ottoman Turks, or they have to come through the sea route, which is very difficult. It is during that time that Portuguese invented the sea route to India through the Cape of Good Hope. Here is the Cape of Good Hope. It is at the tip of South Africa, and they have discovered this route. Once this route was discovered, everything started to change. That is the context of this. You should also understand that this is the time of second generation warfare. So the first generation warfare will take place in land. Second generation warfare will take place through sea. So those who had control over the sea will have control over the land as well. So the Portuguese, they came to India. 1498 is the year when Vasco da Gama discovered the route and came to India. And after that, for almost 100 years, the Portuguese had absolute control over the trade through Orient, or what we called East Indies, what they call East Indies. In fact, they called the American continents also Indies. So that's why we have to say East Indies from their perspective. Now the Portuguese came first, then the Britons started their company, then French came, and there was a rivalry for these territories. We are going to discuss the Anglo-French rivalry because that was the most powerful and most decisive rivalry in the context of Indian colonialism. Now let's move to the chronology. I've already told you that it is in 1498 that Vasco da Gama came to India, and for almost 100 years the Portuguese had control over the Indian trade. They had their generals, they had control over Goa. They took Goa from the Bijapur Sultan. UPSC has asked this as a previous question, the year in which Goa was taken from the Sultan of Bijapur. And it is in 1599 that English East India Company was constituted. So English East India Company was a private company, that should be very clear. It was constituted, and in 1600 the Queen issued a charter giving exclusive rights for the company to trade with India. So English East India Company will be the only party that will be trading with India from Britain. Now their rivals will only be other countries like the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch. And if you see the French, their company was constituted only in 1664. And by this time, English has already established their roots in India. First came the person called William Hawkins. Hawkins came to the court of Jahangir. See, in 1608 he came. He's got small permissions. Then came the person called Thomas Roy. He also got small permissions. And in 1632 the English secured something called the Golden Farman. This is from the Sultan of Golconda. In 1707 they got something even better, which is Farrukhsiyar's Farman. Through this Farman they got absolute rights. Not proper administrative right, but comparatively autonomous rights over the region of Calcutta. They got a special right called Dastak. So through this Dastak, they can issue trade passes to other traders. So these things becomes important bond of contention in later period. We'll explain that in later classes. But this is the trajectory of English in India. And in 1664, the French started their company. They also had their ambitions. So what you have to understand is English came earlier. They had a history of trade in India. And by the time French came here, the English already had roots in India. That's the point we have to understand. That's the chronology that should make sense to you. Now there are two regions that you should be very clear with. One is Pondicherry, second is Madras. Both are located in the Coromandel coast. Coromandel coast is the coast along Bay of Bengal. So in the modern day Tamil Nadu, Andhra region, you have Puducherry here, Pondicherry, and then you have Madras on top of it. Pondicherry was the center of French power. They established the city in 1674. And Madras was the center of English power. They established the city in 1639. In fact, they established a fort called St. George in Madras. This was the first formidable fort of Europe in India. It was built by the British. There were other forts as well. For example, there was the Manuel Fort built by Portuguese in Kochi. That was the first fort by an European power in India. But these forts were not entirely militaristic in nature. They were used for trade purposes as well. But this was a very decisive fort. But the Britain already had control over other forts as well and other regions as well. For example, take the case of Bombay. Bombay was gifted as dowry by the Portuguese king to British king when they had a marital alliance between the families. I already told you Farooq Siyar has issued his farman, so Britain had control over Calcutta as well. So Britain had control over Bombay, Calcutta and Madras, whereas the French had control only over Pondicherry and limited areas like Mahi. So you have to understand that French came later. Their control over territories was also weak. You can see that Dutch, with the help of English, captures Pondicherry sometime in the middle and they later restores it. So the position of French with respect to territory and time period is weak. I hope that concept is clear. This becomes important in the later discussion. That's why I'm emphasizing it. Now let's see an important international event before going into the Anglo-French rivalry in India. This event is called the Austrian Succession War. It took place between 1740 and 1748 in Europe. Now we talk about world wars. In world wars, we know that there are alliances. The European powers will start fighting each other, forming alliances. Then later powers like America will pitch in. This is a trend that you can see in Europe all through their history. The Austrian Succession War is one such thing. Later you will see the 7 Years' War on similar lines. And the alliances will keep changing. So the hero of this Austrian Succession War is the Habsburg Empire. This is one empire that ruled over modern day Austria. Austria, Netherlands to be precise. Now the king of this Habsburg Empire, Charles VI, died and his daughter Maria Theresa was supposed to succeed. Maria Theresa was a woman. So France and Prussia, along with some other countries, Prussia is the modern day Germany, they challenged the succession of Maria Theresa, whereas Britain supported the claim. So there began a rivalry between France and Britain in Europe. This rivalry was spread to India, and Carnatic became the playground for this rivalry in India. I've mentioned a treaty here. This is the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. This is the treaty through which this war came to an end. This is the same treaty through which the first Carnatic War will also come to an end. But let's see the Carnatic War in detail after this. So remember that Carnatic War in India is an extension of the Austrian Succession War that took place in Europe between 1740 and 1748. Now see how Carnatic War extended in India. Before that, see what Carnatic is. Is Carnatic an actual territory? There was a UPSC previous year question about Nawab of Arcot. See this map more clearly. Carnatic is the region that is along the Coromandel coast. It is the name given by Europeans to the hinterlands of Coromandel coast. We don't have a clear area like that. It is a name given by Europeans. If you see this, Madras is located here and Pondicherry is located here in close proximity. That is why this becomes the battlefield of Anglo-French rivalry. You have the Trichinopoli region, that was the capital of the Arcot, and that can be roughly considered as Nawab of Carnatic or Carnatic dynasty. And this dynasty becomes the center of this conflict between French and English. This entire region, just like how entire Europe comes into the succession war, this entire region also comes in, because these people, the French and the British, will start forming alliances between them. You can see Travancore here, Malabar here, these two states combined from Kerala in modern day, and you can see remnants of Mysore, which is the remnants of the Vijayanagara Empire, which declined in 1565 after the Battle of Talaikota. So these fragmented polities becomes the playground of British-French rivalry in India. Now let's come to the first Carnatic War. I've already told you French were weak in India. So they didn't want to provoke British in India. But what the British did was to seize the French ships to provoke the French. But they retaliated. French in return, even though they were weak, they captured Madras. I've told you Madras was the center of British power. And in 1746, the French defeated Anwaruddin. Anwaruddin was the Nawab of Arcot. This battle is very famous, and you have to remember this date as well as the battle. The battle is called Battle of Saint-Thome or the Battle of Adayar. It is also called Battle of Adayar because it was fought along the banks of river Adayar. And in this battle, the French won. This battle is a very important even in Indian history because the French had only limited army. Let's say they had 3 people and the Nawab had 30,000 people in return. So that was the scale, but the French won. So this showed the Europeans, both English and French, that a disciplined army can defeat a bigger army of the Indians. So this is one important message for the Europeans that was taken away from this war. In 1748, I told you that Aix-la-Chapelle was signed and the Austrian succession war came to an end. As a result, Madras, which was captured by the French, was returned to British in India, and the North American territories of France was returned to France by the Britain. Because see, you can see that Europe is right in the center. On the left side you have North America, on the right side you have Indies, and these territories are divided by the colonial powers among each other. So whenever a rivalry breaks out in Europe, it has its remnants in both sides. So the Britain was fighting with France here, Britain was fighting with France here as well. They settled both the territories at the end of 1748. That's it. So when you talk about First Carnatic War, you understand the date, you understand the Battle of Saint-Thome, you understand that Madras was captured by French and it was concluded in 1748 when that war came to an end, that Austrian succession war came to an end through Aix-la-Chapelle Treaty. Now, there is something very logical or illogical for you to think of this First Carnatic War. That is, the French were weak, they came late, but how come they captured Madras? It is for this man called Joseph Francois Dupleix. This is the statue of Dupleix that is erected in Pondicherry. If you go there, you can still see this statue. Now, Dupleix is a man of administrative prowess. He was the French governor since 1741. He was there in India before that as well. He comes from a very rich family. He got placement in the French East India Company as a part of his personal powers. But later he proved himself to be a very good administrator. In fact, he is the one who developed Pondicherry into a fort. He trained his sepoys. You can see that in the later period, sepoys are the major forces that the British use to suppress Indian authorities or Indian people. This trend was started by Dupleix. He trained Indians to fight against Indians as well as foreign enemies. Second, he has cut the public expenditure, like the expenditure of the empire or the French Empire in India, and he increased the defense expenditure. He sometimes put money from his own pocket, and he made Puducherry into a fort. And he was an able diplomat as well. Remember that Dupleix was never a commander. He is only behind the curtains. He will plan things. He is someone who started the culture of interfering in the domestic affairs of Indian rulers. He interfered in the succession battles. He in fact used the Nawab of Carnatic. I've showed you the map of Carnatic. See this here. Now Nawab of Carnatic has a lot of army. And Puducherry, the French region, they had very less army. But he entered into alliance with the Nawab of Carnatic or the Nawab of Arcot, and he used them as a buffer against Madras or the Britain. So this is how diplomacy works. And you can say that this is something similar to the subsidiary alliance that comes later. So he was the original innovator of the idea called subsidiary alliance. He stationed his army. So for example, he stationed the army of France in Hyderabad at the expense of the Nizam of Hyderabad. So this is subsidiary alliance. Later you can see Britain keeping their residence at the expense of the princely states. Same thing. And this is diplomatic powers. I told you he's never a commander. He was recalled in 1754 after the second battle of Carnatic. We'll explain that later. But just understand that he was a top diplomat as well as an able administrator. He was the governor since 1741 and recalled in 1754. And he is the one who made subsidiary alliance, interference, and Pondicherry's prowess. Now let's come to the second battle of Carnatic. I've already told you that Dupleix started interfering in the internal matters of princely states. There are two princely states that will come into context here. One is Hyderabad, second is Carnatic. When I showed you the map, I've already showed you that that is a disintegrated polity. And Carnatic becomes very important because Madras and Puducherry is within that. Now in Hyderabad, the Nizamul Mulk or the Nizam of Hyderabad dies. As a result, there will be a succession battle. Nasir Jung, the son, he makes his claim. Then you have Muzaffar Jung, the grandson, who makes his claim. The French will support Muzaffar Jung and English will support Nasir Jung. Then you have Carnatic. Anwaruddin, we have already seen his name when we discussed the Battle of Saint Thome. He will make his claim to the Carnatic throne and Chanda Sahib will also make the throne. I have marked the French supported kings or the princes in green and English supported princes in red. So these England and France, they started interfering in the internal succession battles of India. So in the first Carnatic War, if it was Austrian succession war, in the second Carnatic War, it is entirely domestic concerns. There is no relation of international affairs. So be very clear with the concept there. Now let's go to the second Carnatic War, which happened from 1749 after a gap of 1 year since the Aix-la-Chapelle Treaty and 1754. In 1749, in the year that began, the war begins when Anwaruddin is killed. So Anwaruddin is supported by the British. Anwaruddin is killed in a French alliance of Muzaffar Jung, Chanda Sahib and France. They kill Anwaruddin in the Battle of Amber in 1749 and they take control. Muzaffar Jung becomes the emperor. But in 1751, someone important comes to the picture called Robert Clive. Robert Clive, with an army of just 210 men, captures Arcot, the capital of Arcot. So Arcot is already controlled by this person, Muzaffar Jung. No, Chanda Sahib. So he is French ally, but Arcot is taken by the British at this time. So what to do? They comes to retaliation, but they cannot defeat Robert Clive. Chanda Sahib suffers, he suffers defeat, and in 1758 he is executed. As a result, France loses the battle because their allies lose the battle and Britain will take control. Once the battle was lost, Dupleix is called back. In 1754, he is called back to France. And Britain and France comes to a settlement where again they'll settle the Indian territories and North American territories. But still this is not the end of it, still the rivalry goes on. Now replacing Dupleix, a new person will come into the picture. The name of the new person before going into that, let's discuss the 7 Years' War. The new person is Cote de Lally. He is the general who replaces Dupleix. That's the new person. Just keep that name in mind. But let's look at the 7 Years' War before that. Just like the Austrian Succession War, there is yet another war that will come out in Europe in the period 1758 to 1763. I've told you that just like the world wars, the alliances will keep shifting. So see, Britain was allied with Austria before. Now you can see that Austria is allying with France and Britain is allying with Russia. And they are fighting for a war because several causes are there. Mostly it is fought in North American territories as well as in Europe, and it extends to India as well. And the third Carnatic War starts in India. In the third Carnatic War, you have two people, Cote de Lally, and the second person is Ayrecourt. Ayrecourt is the British general and Cote de Lally is the French general. In 1760, they come across in a decisive battle called the Battle of Vendewash. This is a place in Tamil Nadu. It is called as Vandavasi. This battle is fought there, and the French suffers absolute defeat. That's why I said it is this battle that decides the course of India. 1757 Battle of Plassey takes place. The British gets control, the Diwani and Nizamad rights over Bengal, but still they have to deal with the French here. They are on equal plater here. But once the Battle of Wandiwash is over, the Britain is the only competitor in India because France loses almost all their territories. But in 1763, the Treaty of Paris is signed. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris is signed. This is the peace treaty of the Third Carnatic War. And in this treaty, the French territory of Mahi and Puducherry is restored back. But France gets confined to a mere commercial entity in India, not an administrative power. Nowhere after this we will listen about France. We'll talk about France when we talk about Tipu Sultan in 1792, because Tipu Sultan trained his army along French lines. But other than that, we'll not hear about France anywhere after this, because they are just confined to their commercial interest. Whereas Britain extends everything from there. So 7 Years' War coincided with the Third Carnatic War, which was concluded in 1763 through the Treaty of Paris, same treaty. And one other year you have to remember for sure is 1760, when the Battle of Wandiwash was fought, where Cote de Lally was defeated by Sir Eyre Coote, the general of British. Now why? What are the reasons why the Britain had superiority over France in India? This can be a mains question as well as a prelims question. It's a conceptual thing that you have to remember. There are 5 clear reasons for that. The first reason, the English East India Company was a private company, whereas the French East India Company was a government company. So when you are a government company, you always have an element of accountability and control over your top. When you are a private company, whatever you gain from India, whatever you gain from the surplus in India, that is yours. So you have an added advantage and an independent decision making power. That's the first reason. Second is the naval power. Because if you see the territories, and I've shown you the map of Indian Ocean before, and territories are spread across. You have North America, you have India, then you have Sumatra, Java, and you need navy to connect all of them. And whoever has a superior navy will have control over them. So the Britain had a superior navy, and they made sure that France is severed in their ties across all the colonies. So when there is a war that is breaking out, the supplies of France from the Europe to other parts will be blocked by Britain. This is the second thing. Third, the control over geographical territories within India. Pondicherry was the major region that France had under control. They also had Mahi. But take the case of Britain. They had Calcutta, Bombay and Madras. Still the richest cities in India. At that time itself, they were city centers. So Britain had a lot of money coming in through the control of these cities. I've told you the reason why they got Bombay. Now one point can be connected with this, undermining of commercial interests. So the person called Dupleix, he was an imperial person. He had territorial ambitions over commercial interest. So once you compromise your commercial interest, from where will the money come from? Britain never compromised that, but France compromised that, so they had very less money. Finally, the role of individual commanders. If you had Dupleix on one side, you had Robert Clive and Eyre Coote on the other side. Robert Clive won the war with just 210 men. So this is yet another reason, the individual prowess of the commanders. So on the whole, these are the 5 reasons that led to the defeat of French in India, and 1760 marks the whitewashing year of power of Britain towards India. So keep these years, keep these events, and keep the entire concept in your mind. We'll come up with yet another video in the Mughals to Mahatma series after this. Keep watching the series to have a comprehensive control over the modern India portions. Thank you for listening.